Gojira certainly have been a bright spot for heavy metal. It's amazing to think that their debut album came out in 2001, which is 16 years ago. This band still, for some reason, feels like they're brand new, and maybe that's because they continue to expand their sound and sort of reinvent themselves a little bit, which we saw most recently on the album Magma. However, this is also a band that has another thing going for them, and that's the fact that they've never really released any bad albums, perhaps only ones that are disappointments or curiosities to fans, but never anything that has felt outright wrong. But with that being said, we still need to rank these albums, not only because Gojira is a phenomenal band, but also because they won Music Madness 2017. So it's my duty to let you know what the albums are ranked from 1 to 6, at least in my own opinion. So I'm going to do my best to explain myself and defend myself. Of course, leave your list in the comments box below. Let's get started. Number 6 is The Link. Now, this is the Curious Sophomore album by Gojira, which was released a couple of years after their debut. Now, this is a disc that's not necessarily bad whatsoever. In fact, it's one that has a lot of groove to it. However, it's one that feels a little bit lost within itself, as though the band were continuing to experiment with sounds and toying with what it is that they wanted the band to be, and just didn't quite get that evolutionary development quite yet down pat. And because of that, this album can sometimes feel like a little bit of a cluster, like something is a bit missing. Like the missing link. It's really kind of weird how that works out, but that's exactly how it feels. Like this is a disc that has all of the prime functions and prime numbers, but it just needs something even. But even with that being said, The Link still shines as a fairly decent sophomore album, one that certainly didn't seem to have the same pomp and circumstance as its predecessor, and certainly not one that even is mentioned within the ranks of its cousins that would come later, or brothers, however you want to say it. But it was still an album that was able to showcase the band moving forward. And, even the best sometimes have a little bit of a sophomore slump to deal with. Number 5 is Magma. This is the most recent Gojira affair, and one that many people may put a lot higher than this. And really, I think the reason why it is so low is that it's bogged down by the brothers that surround it, that which came before it. Plus, it's also the Curiosity album out of the bunch, the one in which they took things to a little bit more of a personal matter. They definitely changed up their sound a little bit. They abandoned a little bit of complexity for simplicity at points on this disc. And really, all of these sacrifices or all of these changes made for a disc that initially perplexed a lot of listeners. But like with a lot of Gojira albums, this is one that you have to pump forward and listen to a number of times before you start to realize that the genius of its groove and the ability for it to really speak volumes without doing as much as they were on previous affairs is certainly something that is pretty amazing. This comes through as perhaps Gojira as their most open-faced and honest, and certainly some of the themology that is based surrounding the album is something that helps with that newfound honest feeling. Overall, this is a disc that's perhaps in 10 years maybe placed a lot higher and they rank them all, but for right now, it's at number 5. Number 4, The Way of All Flesh, which may tick off a lot of people, or it might be perfectly placed. I really don't know. After the masterpiece of From Mars to Sirius, which we will get to eventually, trust me, this is the disc that followed it up, and the expectations were very lofty for this album, and by and large, Gojira was able to answer the bell. However, whenever you are falling in the shadow of an album such as From Mars to Sirius, there's going to be some things that kind of go a little bit wrong. This is an album that's only plagued by some things that sort of feel right, and things that just feel like they're a little bit off-kilter or off-center. Now, some may immediately look to the 9-minute and 54-second The Art of Dying as an easy indication of something that's gone wrong, but in reality, this is one of the huge highlights that this album is able to boast. It's in really some of the surrounding material that feels just a little bit weak by comparison to the offering that we had just received. And whenever you take that out and compare it to some of the things that we got thereafter, it certainly does feel like it's the sort of red-haired stepchild of the Gojira discography. Still a phenomenal album, one that certainly pushed things forward in a very somber way. This is a disc that has a melancholy that is strapped in with a dangerous driver on speed that is driving you down Fury Road, hoping that you die. The Way of All Flesh comes in at number 4. Number 3, Terra Incognita, the raucous debut by this group. And what do you get whenever you have a song called Satan is a Lawyer? You get some fun. Now, whenever the band first broke through, there was obvious references made to bands such as Metallica and Meshuggah, almost like a Metallica meets Meshuggah type hybrid, with perhaps some Neurosis thrown in and maybe some Clutch or just some old school fun for good measure. This was not yet a style that was as defined as it is today back in 2001. You know, this is actually an album that predates Mastodon by a couple of years, and of course by the time that Gojira really got noticed by a wide audience, it was one where they had some contemporaries to help fill the gaps and make this feel like a full-fledged scene. But Terra Incognita was able to present a lot of great ideas and really did showcase that sound very well. The Metallica, meets Meshuggah idea is certainly very well constructed and certainly one that has a lot of merit whenever you listen to this material, as the guitars sometimes have that Metallica thrash approach, but with that Meshuggah edge. And based off of that, the vocals are also able to emanate a little bit of that Metallica tone as well. With all of this said, Gojira emerged as a band to certainly be watched. Their breed not necessarily being all of that crafty, creative, or new as of right now. However, who knew that what was actually going on was a sleeping giant was slowly rising to the surface. Number 2, Also Vash. Now, this is going to be a curious pick for a lot of people, considering whenever it first came out, it was an album that was met with acclaim, but also met with some skepticism, mainly because this was a shorter album than the bunch, but really what Gojira did is that they sacrificed a little bit of quantity in order to really amplify the quality. And that's exactly what they were able to accomplish with Also Vash. This is a very astute album, an observation that feels like it had all of the best elements of Gojira's sound in mind, and they were still crafting, they were still touching base with some of the other things that made them kind of unique travelers within the heavy metal landscape. There was a little bit of prog in here, though perhaps not as much as on previous albums or later on. This is instead an album that feels like a direct approach that is able to bring the friendliness of the other corners of the sound along for the ride, and the perfect storm basically brewed, causing the thunder and lightning to essentially strike on a rock and strike this album from that granite. And based off of that philosophy, Also Vash is a very, I think often ignored sleeper masterpiece that this band was able to offer during a time where already they had delivered some fantastic material. But of course that leaves number 1, which is From Mars to Sirius. I told you we were going to come to it. This was an album that, for a band that had just given us The Link, really you never expected to come. In fact, this was probably for a lot of people within that elder age, the first Gojira album that perhaps that you had heard of, considering it sort of came out and immediately was starting to get some attention. It was seen and heard it's pretty good. However, time has certainly aged this album brilliantly. It's almost like a fine wine. After the 10 or 11 years, or however long that it's been, it is now ranked among that of legend, considering this is a disc that showcased what this band was all about and expanded upon the sounds that Terra Incognita was able to give us, and also add some of the bona fide experience that The Link provided, even though it was seen as kind of a curious album, in order to deliver an absolute beast. If you thought that Also Vash was the thunder and lightning coming together to strike the masterpiece on the granite, this is instead almost like being hand-delivered to us from the metal gods themselves. Mostly because this album really sheds that Metallica meets Meshuggah meets Neurosis meets whatever handiwork, and instead it becomes uniquely Gojira. And also consider the time frame whenever this album was delivered also. This was right around the time where everything was starting to become a full-fledged scene. The tornado and the hurricane were starting to combine together in order to showcase a brand new breed of heavy metal that had been going on for the first corner of the 2000s, but was now ready to unleash itself upon the world. Bands such as Baroness and Mastodon and now Gojira and others were plodding their way to the top, and this is an album that certainly feels like one of the great masterworks of that class, something that will remain with them absolutely forever. They crafted their own sound with this album, and the unique part and probably the best part about Gojira is that even though that they did that, they immediately sought to add new layers to it on newer releases, or just destroy it altogether and rebuild it from scratch. From Mars to Sirius may not have laid that foundation. That was something that Terra Incognita and the Link were able to establish, but instead it gave that foundation a lot of solidarity and then built the brick house that surrounded it. Well, there's our list, ladies and gentlemen. Was yours different? Let me know in the comments below. Is there another band that you think should have all of their albums ranked? Let me know as well. I'm CoverKillerNation, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care.